for joining us. My name is Omondi, and this is KTV Primetime News. It is a Tuesday, the 8th day of November, the year 2022. Tonight we have a lot in store for you in matters happening in the country and of course beyond our borders. The COP27 continues in Egypt as the world leaders negotiate on deals towards the climate action. In our country today, we have seen what has sparked really the political debate concerning a move or a plan to extend the presidential term from the constitutional 5-year term, which the maximum a president can run for 2 terms for the 5 years. That's summing to 10 years. Of course, probably a member of allied to the Kenya Kwanza camp insinuated that they should make changes that president is not limited to the terms but the age of 75. This has really sparked debates and uproar in the political landscape. Just a lot for you, all right? But in just a minute, we shall be coming back with the insight and the comprehensive bulletin. Welcome to the broadcast, and I want to learn with the company of Macklin Otieno, who is a sign language interpreter. Tonight we're seeing live on broadcast on social media platforms on Facebook, KTV Kenya, and Twitter, KTV_Kenya. It's also live on YouTube at KTV Kenya Live. Now, the Labor and Employment Court Judge Anne Ngubueni Mwaure has ordered the striking Kenya Airways pilots to end their mass action and report to work by tomorrow at 6 a.m. Their employer KQ has also been warned against taking disciplinary action targeting pilots who proceeded on the strike. The interim orders will allow the grounded fleet at Kenya Airways at the Kenya airports to be airborne as the court hears and determines the KQ impulse.
The push and pull at the country's airline has been put to a temporary halt. This is after Judge Anne Mwaure of the Nairobi Labor and Employment Court ordered an end to the strike staged by the disgruntled pilots. In the 7-point judgment, which was delivered in under 5 minutes, the judge directed the pilots to report unconditionally for the rostered flights starting tomorrow at 6 a.m., signaling a return of air traffic in KQ air routes that have been deserted for the last 4 days. On the other hand, KQ has been ordered to allow the pilots perform their duties without intimidation, with the judge barring the employer from instituting disciplinary processes against the pilots. The order remains in place until determination of the case, with the next mention set for the 21st this month to confirm compliance and give date for ruling. Judge Mwaure had given the 2 parties to the stalemate 3 hours to formulate their own solution, and when none was forthcoming, she reappeared in the courtroom with her orders. KQ had taken 11 CALPA officials to court for contempt of a court order issued on 31st October stopping the strike. However, through their lawyers, the pilots asked for vacation of the order, while KQ wanted the pilots ordered back to the cockpit. According to KQ, they had at least 3 meetings to iron out issues, but all attempts have hit a dead end. An estimated 12,000 travelers were affected in the 4 days, with tourism, trade, health and agriculture sectors also taking a hit. Dennis Omondi, KUTV.
And of course, something also interesting that has come out from the pilot strike, people saying that if in one way or the other you're not affected by the striking pilots, you need to reevaluate the kind of friends and the circles you keep. Away from that now, the renovation of a plan to increase the current presidential term limit has sparked uproar in the political landscape, and this comes after the Fafi Member of Parliament, Salah Yakub, proposed amendment to Constitution to increase the 2 5-year terms limit and instead limit the age of the presidential hopeful to 75. Home Evans with the details.
Fafi, Member of Parliament Salah Yakub's sentiments during a relief food distribution drive in Garissa over the weekend did not settle well with most Kenyans, setting stage for critics. Activists and opposition leaders could not hide their displeasure over the remarks made by Fafi MP, coming out strongly to oppose a move by certain of United Democratic Alliance Party members of Parliament to change the presidential term limit, even as his own party disowned the idea. Miguna on his Twitter account termed such move as cruel joke that won't pass a referendum, and such attempt will be making William Ruto a one-term president. Fafi lawmaker hinted on a possible constitutional amendment bill to scrap current 2-term presidential limit and replace it with age limit of 75 years. Article 142 of the Kenyan Constitution states that a person shall not hold office as president for more than 2 terms not exceeding 10 years. Shall the proposal see the light of the day, President William Ruto, who is 55 years old, could rule for more than 20 years should he be re-elected after every 5 years, but such move will come at displeasure of many Kenyans. United Democratic Party National Chairman Johnson Muthama has dismissed allegations that the party was planning to sponsor a motion seeking to scrap the presidential 2-term limit. Muthama stating that, as I quote, "As party they stand for open democracy and remain supportive of the 2-term presidential limit." However, for such proposal to pass, it will have to be supported by 2/3 of members in the National and the Senate before being subjected to a referendum where Kenyans will have the final say. Home Evans for KUTV, Nairobi.
Now, the Inspector General of Police nominee, Engineer Japhet Koome, today appeared before the vetting committee at the Parliament buildings. Koome was recommended to the position by the President, William Ruto, on the September 27th, following former IG of Police Hilary Mutyambai taking a terminal leave ahead of expiration of his term in office. Koome is currently the Commandant of the National Police Service College in Kiganjo, a position that he will relinquish if approved.
That even the
Inspector General of Police nominee Japhet Koome has today appeared before the Committee of the National Assembly on Administration and Internal Security and the Senate Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations. Before his appointment, Koome was a commandant of the National Police Service College in Kiganjo and also served as Nairobi Police Commander before moving to Kiganjo. Upon his approval, he will succeed the former Inspector General of Police, Hilary Mutyambai. Koome has valued himself at 89 million Kenya shillings. Members of the vetting committee raised key concerns linked to the police service, among them corruption in the service. In his defense, the nominee said that police officers are trained to fight against corruption and not to practice it. Matters cattle rustling were not left behind. The issue has been persistent over the years in pastoralist communities. The Inspector General nominee was put to task to elaborate on how he will tackle the matter. According to Koome, Kenya loses about 51 billion Kenya shillings every year to cattle rustling.
Every year, the amount of money involved in terms of cows, goats involved is about 4.92 billion every year. It's 4.92 billion.
Koome has lauded police officers with good integrity, with 98% applauded for professionalism and patriotism, while tasking himself to deal with the remaining 2%.
Incidentally, we have very good police officers in this country. 98% very professional, patriotic is only 2%. Very professional, doing very good job. Therefore, Honorable Bunja, I have the critical mass have the critical mass to change that 2%.
The nominated Inspector General has over 31 years of experience and, if approved, he will be the 4th Inspector General under the Constitution and the 12 police boards since independence. Joseph Doko, KUTV.
Thank you, Joseph Duku, for that report. Now, the National Police Service has made major changes within its rank and file to fill vacant posts left by the promoted and retired police officers and boost operations in the affected areas. This comes when the service is facing an image crisis amid claims of extrajudicial killings and other forms of abuse. Among the changes announced by the acting police IG, Lord Gabo, is the appointment of the new police spokesperson, Jeff Mwangi, with the details.
The National Police Service is a new spokesperson in changes made on Monday, November 7. Dr. Otieno took over from Ronosh Oso, who was promoted to the role of Commandant of the National Police Service Training College in Kiganjo. He also replaced the incoming Inspector General of Police, Japhet Koome. Still on the changes announced by Acting Inspector General of Police Nor Gabo, Deputy Commandant at Kiganjo Police Training College Philip Dolo was recalled back to the police headquarters in Nairobi. Coast Regional Police Commander Manasi Musyoka was moved to Nairobi region to replace James Mugera, who retired after attaining retirement age. The new Coast Regional Police Commander will be Lydia Ligami, while Paul Langat was posted to Western as the Regional Police Commander to replace Paris Mudhoni, who retired from the service. Gabo also named Kadri Mugu as the Staff Officer Training at Police Headquarters. Police officers said more changes are expected from next month once Koome takes over as the new Inspector General of Police. More changes are also expected at the Director of Criminal Investigations, where Director Mohammed Amin is still organizing the agency. Jeff Mwangi, KUTV.
Now, President William Ruto said the carbon credits market should benefit communities fighting the adverse effects of climate change. President William Ruto was addressing the UN Conference of Parties on the Climate Change COP27 when he was launching the African Carbon Markets Initiative in Africa. The conference brought together various world leaders to deliberate on how to curb the issue of climate change globally.
Kenya, and by extension the Horn of Africa, is experiencing the worst drought in 40 years.
It is at the ongoing 27th UN Conference of Parties on Climate Change in Egypt, where President William Ruto addressed delegates from various states and also launched the African Carbon Market Initiative for Africa. President Ruto said the carbon credits market should benefit communities fighting the adverse effects of climate change. According to President Ruto, Kenya leads in generation of carbon credits in Africa, accounting for over 20% of the continent's volume over the past 5 years. The president noted that a portion of the proceeds have been invested towards funding clean cooking and solar home systems.
A portion of the proceeds from these credits have been invested towards funding clean cooking and solar home systems. The dividend of the emerging circularly exemplify the vision of the global conservation movement.
Furthermore, President Ruto said Kenya is committed to working with initiatives such as African Carbon Market Initiative in expanding carbon markets and carbon credit activities in the country.
The world has a golden opportunity to rapidly achieve these objectives by developing a robust, transparent, and sustainable mechanism through which a carbon credit market can yield attractive income and development opportunities for communities at the front line in the fight against climate change.
He has added that through the initiative, Kenya will be generating more than 30 tons of carbon credits annually, earning incomes and creating green jobs for the youth.
Some estimates suggest that by 2030, Kenya will be generating over 30 million tons of carbon credits annually, thereby earning hundreds of millions of dollars as incomes and creating hundreds of thousands of green jobs for our young people.
On the other hand, the president has urged environmental conservation organizations globally, including UNEP, to put up appropriate measures that will help curb climate change issues.
Effective response to climate change requires adequate and predictable financing, capacity building, technology development and transfer. Climate finance remains the single most critical enabler in unlocking climate action and especially addressing adaptation in vulnerable communities of the global south.
The conference was officially launched on 6th of November and is expected to end on 18th of November. Shadrach Simiyu, KUTV.
Well, before Prime Minister Raila Odinga is in Egypt to attend the United Nations 27th Conference of Parties on Climate Change. The conference has brought together more than 130 global leaders to deliberate on how to tackle the effects of climate change. And according to a report by his ODM political outfit, Raila Odinga is expected to address the conference as an African Union High Representative for Infrastructure Development in Africa. The conference was officially opened on 6th of November and is expected to end on the 18th of November. And the members of parliament today began debating on the proposal which was brought up to the floor of the House by the Matungulu member of parliament Stephen Mule Gichugu and his counterpart, of course, on the law to be amended to ensure that 5% of the national government revenue goes to CDF. According to the MPs, activities in the constituencies have been reportedly come to a halt as a result of the Supreme Court's decision to disband the CDF kitty.
The National Government Constituencies Development Fund is once again a motion of debate in the National Assembly by the MPs who want the fund to be entranced in law, citing the ruling made by the Supreme Court that they say has altered activities in all the 290 constituencies.
CDF to me is the only fund that the constituent seems to understand and know. That today, even if we had any other fund out there, you already have Wezo Fund, we have the NGAF, but every other person still asks where CDF is. As we speak right now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I have people and constituents lining up, waiting and asking for school fees. And there's nothing you can tell them to understand that even the CDF itself has not been disbursed. Number one, we request that even as this motion continues, we must find a way to have the money disbursed to the constituencies as soon as possible so as to mitigate the issues that are already going on around in the constituency.
In a judgment delivered by a 5-judge bench led by Chief Justice Martha Koome, it was found that the law setting up the fund was faulty and allowing members of parliament to manage funds, offence Division of Revenue and Public Finance Law, hence declaring the CDF Act 2013 as unconstitutional.
CDF is a single-most fund, Honorable Speaker, that can be touched and felt by wananchi at the ground. CDF, Honorable Speaker, is a fund that works beyond borders, beyond boundaries, and it was even improved to the extent that there is equity in its distribution.
Funding over 5,000 kids in secondary schools and over 2,000 kids through their university education. Today, Madam Speaker, as we debate here, many of those children who are benefiting from CDF, some of them are now not going to school because CDF has not been disbursed.
Treasury has yet to disburse funds, including balances from the previous years following the ruling. According to a ruling by the High Court, the Constitution cannot be amended once published, hence the proposal for MPs to give their views on the same ahead of the publication. The bill will be subjected to public participation, one being by members giving their views on the proposal, and at the committee stage where stakeholders are expected to give their views. For KUTV, I am Chelsea Maluki.
And that report by Teresia Maluki are taking our first break here on KTV Primetime News. In a moment, shall be coming back with the discussion of the night, the COP27 and the climate action, which is the center stage of every discourse across the world as the COP27 summit continues in Egypt. Stay with us. See you in a moment.
Maelfu na maelfu ya wahamiaji wakiwa na watoto kutoka nchi za Amerika ya Kati wanaendelea kuwasili kwenye mpaka kati ya Marekani na Mexico.
But folks, I'm going. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ni habari kutoka pembe zote duniani.
People pass kukufuku. People pass ni idea.
Sazidi ananyonya, hanyonyi vizuri, anakuwa hayuko comfortable.
Jeshi la Jamhuri ya Kidemokrasia ya Kongo linapambana na waasi wa ADF.
Kwa sasa wanatoa wito kwa mashirika, makampuni na vile vituo vya uchukuzi.
Mambo mengi yatakwenda kama yalivyopangwa.
Hapa ni kuna mmoja wa viongozi wa chama cha wavuvi katika eneo hili.
Zaidi tunajaribu kuwapa chanjo ili ina boost ama inanyanyua kinga ya mwili, ndio inaenda kupelekea kupambana na virusi.
Ni duniani leo, Jumatatu mpaka Ijumaa, moja kwa moja kutoka VOA Swahili, Washington DC.
Sasa ni bora zaidi, mwanzo mpya, mambo mapya. Msimu mwingine wa Boresha Kilimo unakuletea teknolojia ibuka, kilimo mseto, uongezaji thamani. Teknolojia dijitali ya mauzo inawezesha ufikiaji wa masoko. Sokomoko yako, mahangaiko yako ya kufikia masoko yamefika kikomo, manake tunao Mkulima Yangu.
What Mkulima Yangu does is it connects farmers with the market.
Hii ni Boresha Kilimo kwa ushirikiano na Mkulima Yangu. Atafutaye hachoki na kichoka kesha pata. Kwa makala maalum ya kilimo, ungana nasi kila Jumamosi saa 6:30 kwenye kipindi ukipendacho Boresha Kilimo.
Ukiwa na dukuduku la michezo, tunafungua sanduku la dukuduku kwa ufahamu zaidi. Kila danadana, mitimko, mifiatuko na harakati zote ugani, sisi ni wako mwandani. Kukurukakara zote nyanjani, ziezi kuangaziwa zaidi ya micharazo michezoni. Mimi mwanaspoti wako matata Peter Pinches Mwaora, ndakuwa na jopo lenye maarifa sufufu, nikufahamishe na nikuburudishe wewe shabiki shakiki, kwa uhakiki na kindakindaki.
Welcome to Engine, an educational show for all the family. Get ready for some exciting learning and fun teaching.
How does a plane fly over the sea? How do the planets float so weightlessly? Let's go! Let's go! It's technology. Let's go! Let's go! Science, you and me. Science, let's go! We're learning every day. Let's go! Let's go! Engine leads the way.
Unemployment has hit you hard. Your salary is meager. You decide to venture into business, but you're struggling to thrive in it. You would want to reap a big tip on how not to run into losses.
Forget the preachy business blogs, the hyperbolic motivational speeches, and all the roads down desperation.
Hope has come with model stories from small successful entrepreneurs. We tell you these tales weekly on The Budding Entrepreneur. Join us as we help you make your trade profitable and often smile to the bank.
I'm a freshman in Kenyatta University. This is all what I've heard about campus. Campus is full of freedom.
Ni cumulative.
Mchezo hiyo ilipuka gani kwani? I'm a fourth year student and I mostly hang out at shopping center. I'm a arboretum, and what I'd tell first years is it's never too late to start being serious.
You are watching KUTV Primetime News with Omondi Otieno.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on KTV Primetime News. Now, time for our discussion, of course, talking about the climate action revolving around the COP27 that is going on in Egypt. Now, nations, activists, experts and leaders are gathering in the Egyptian town of Sharm el-Sheikh for the UN climate negotiations. From the previous COP meetings, it appears that there are several unmet climate commitments from the highly emitting nations towards mitigating climate change effects. Amidst the global financial recessions, what is the position of Africa in climate action, and will the COP27 really count for Africa in the negotiations? And that generally forms the basis of our discussion tonight. Joining me is Barbara Katinya, who is an environmentalist and a climate change activist. Thank you so much, Barbara, for dedicating your time for this discussion. All right, Barbara, so we get the ball rolling, and the conversation right now across the globe is revolving around the COP27, and maybe we could start by you shedding light on what exactly is this COP27 and how does it work, and probably tell us what is the significance of the COP27 to our nation, Kenya.
Thank you very much. I feel delighted to be here to talk about current issues. So COP27 is actually the 27th Conference of Parties on Climate Change. So it comes from COP. COP is the decision-making body of the UNFCCC, which means United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Like just to mention, most times in the climate space we experience really technical terms, and disclaimer, I might hear one or two. Yeah.
So, right. So now tell us, what is the significance of this COP? What is the significance of COP, and how is it important for us as Kenyans it's something that is happening in our continent, Africa, in Egypt?
So the COP, or the Conference of Parties, is very, very important because during its formation it had 4 goals. The first one was to keep the global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The next is to mobilize finance and then adapt and protect communities and natural life. And the final one was to try and mitigate and work together to deliver all these goals. So it becomes very, very important because Kenya is one of the countries that is very, very vulnerable and is experiencing one of the worst impacts of climate change. It's actually a frontline country when it comes to these effects of climate change. So the Conference of Parties being a conference where global leaders come together and talk about these issues that could affect our future, these issues about climate change, which is a crisis that's there right now, which is actually an emergency, then it becomes very, very important and very significant for our country at the moment.
All right. So it's noteworthy that you say that there are a number of COP conferences that have been held before. So maybe just to borrow from the previous COP conferences that have been held before. So what are some of the milestones of these COP meetings, of these COP summits, to understand the significance of the COP summits? So what are some of the milestones that have been witnessed following the previous COP meetings that we have had across the world?
Well, being the 27th, it's been 30 years since it all began, and I'll just maybe mention the most recent. So I will talk about maybe the Kyoto Protocol, which was, because it involves finance, which was in 1997, sorry. So it was about the highest emitting countries are supposed to pay for their emissions too. So the more you emit, the more you pay for it. So that was one maybe significant step. The next was in 2015, which was when the Paris Agreement came about. It was the issue concerning global temperatures. So initially, we were not supposed to exceed 2 degrees Celsius, but according to the Paris Agreement, we were advised to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And then that was in 2015. And then fast forward to last year, COP26, where we had the Paris Handbook. So the Paris Agreement was just like a set of, just words. But when we had the handbook, it's like breaking it down and explaining how we're supposed to achieve the goals in the Paris Agreement, like how every country can do it. It talks about the hows. And then also in COP26, we also had the Glasgow Climate Pact, which also talked more about the finance and the mitigation, adaptation, and how countries can scale up their nationally determined contributions and try and adjust them like every 2 years and try and keep up with the climate crisis.
All right. Now, let us now try to drive this point home, talking about effects, the adverse effects of climate change. So I believe that climate change is a way, has been responsible for the extreme weather conditions and disasters that are so catastrophic. We saw the flooding in Pakistan, drought that has been witnessed across parts of Africa. So maybe to make people really understand the importance of climate actions, what are some of the dangers of climate change that we're witnessing? There are some things we're witnessing and people don't really know that they are results of climate change. So what are some of these dangers of climate change to make people really know that we are witnessing this and this is a result of climate action, or rather climate change?
Yes. So right now we actually call it the climate crisis because change makes people relax a bit. So we either call it the climate crisis or the climate emergency, meaning that we need to act immediately because of the state we're in at the moment. So some of the impacts of climate change could be, let's just start with economical impacts. We've seen just across the border. Not as a country, as a county, Nairobi County in Kajiado, we're seeing we're having the worst drought in 40 years. We're seeing that, and that is just one of them. We see that we're going to have if we do not do anything about the current situation, it means that we're going to have more frequent weather disasters. We're going to have droughts are going to be very, very frequent and very, very severe. We're going to have really bad floods. It means that the frequency of floods is going to increase. And it means that the issue of water, the water crisis is going to become very, very bad to the extent that we're going to either die of too much of it or lack of it. It means that because the droughts are going to be so prolonged, it means you're probably going to die of lack of water, and when it rains, it's going to be so severe that it will flood. So it means that it becomes an issue of the water crisis. It goes back to the food issue. We're going to have a food crisis. It goes back to agriculture. It's going to affect our soils, the nutrients. It's going to affect the nutrients in the soil. It means that we're going to have an issue with crop failure. We're going to have starving nations. So it's the issue of climate change becomes a very critical issue. It becomes what we eat. It becomes the air we breathe. It becomes the water we drink. It becomes the clothes that we wear. So it becomes a very, very multidimensional issue. We saw pastoralists selling cattle that were worth 50,000 for 500, and 50 shillings. So we're seeing such kind of losses. That is it means that we're going to experience very, very, it's even hard to explain. It's hard to find a word for it. It means that it's going to hit you from what you eat, no water to drink, what you wear, no money to spend. So it's crazy.
All right. So, but anyway, just to get to understand, because maybe this is your line, and when you're doing climate activism, you get to understand that maybe in your research you establish that this group category of people are the people responsible for what we are facing right now. So could you probably just on a light note tell us for what we've seen, what you experience, it's not in Kenya alone, it's across the world. The issue of climate change is affecting every corner of the world. So who are the major contributors to this climate crisis? Who should take much responsibility, in as much as, yes, mitigating the effects of climate change is a collective responsibility, but who are the major contributors to this climate crisis?
Okay, so that just brings me to the point of climate justice and why it's called climate justice. So it is that because you find that the least emitters of climate change are experiencing the worst impacts of climate change. Absolutely. So you find that the developed countries, the global north, most of the highest emitters are actually found there. When you talk about the United States, when you talk about China, Brazil, Europe, most of them are actually there. And just to mention that, so when we, like I've just mentioned, so those are actually most of the top emitters. So we find that we are all in the same boat, but we're in different ships.
Absolutely.
I like to use different analogies. Like I would say, for example, when it's raining, there is this one person who is in their own car, in their own private car, and they see that it's raining, but they're still driving. And there's this other person that is in a public vehicle, in a bus or a matatu, and it's still raining. And there's this other person who has an umbrella and is still walking in the rain. And there's this third person who has nothing. So it's different. The person who's in a private car is experiencing the rain, yes, but they're not feeling it really. The person who's in a bus or a matatu means that they're going to feel it way later when they get off the bus. The person who is walking in the rain is actually feeling it, and the only thing that is keeping them from getting wet is the umbrella. And this person who has nothing either has to wait in a shed or walk in the rain. So that's how the climate crisis affects all of us, depending with where you are, with the capacity that you have to adapt to it. That's what determines how much you're going to face the impacts, and that's now where the line is drawn when it comes to vulnerable or frontline communities and how they're really affected by the impacts of climate change.
Right, I really like the analogy, of course, that you're bringing. It's a practical example, and breaking it down to us, making us to understand, because most of us are laymen when it comes to issues of climate change and other topics. So, just to note at some point, you mentioned that Africa, countries in Africa, we are so vulnerable to effects of climate change, and Africa as a country, not as a country but as a continent, is the least climate resilient region in the world. But as you mentioned, that the Western countries, where they do a lot of industrialization, being the leading contributors to the climate changes. So maybe just to ask, do you feel that these countries who are leading in issues of climate, the causing agents of climate crisis, are they doing enough in terms of compensation? Because in Africa we are not the leading, but now the adverse effects are felt in Africa. So are they doing enough in terms of compensation and for the loss and damage that they are causing to the rest of the world?
To be honest, no. This is because it goes back to the Kyoto Protocol, which was in 1992. So it stated that the highest emitters should contribute up to 100 billion annually, and we're still waiting for that. How many years down the line? So it means that there's so much that has to be done. It means that all this time that they were supposed to give those funds, maybe at that time we were supposed to adapt, and that did not happen. So that means that our capability to adapt was just scrapped off. So that means that they're not doing enough in terms of loss and damage. We wouldn't be having these conversations if they're actually doing enough. Well, yes, we agree that there were gaps, because I believe that COP27 this year we're going to have discussions where they're going to actually explain now how exactly these funds are going to come out, and in terms of we're going to have negotiations where if we can have set dates when these funds can come out, so that maybe that can move us a step forward. Also, if we start setting dates, then that means that all these agreements that have not been binding before can now become a little bit binding if we have set dates and if we have the house of how this finance is going to trickle down. But to be honest, for the past, since all these conferences began, we're not getting the kind of support that we need.
All right. So, because actually we've even seen this when our President William Ruto was addressing the world leaders at the UN conference. He was saying that the world leaders should honor the promises that they made of they should fulfill the 12 trillion climate change money that the funds actually that they were supposed to send to the countries that are so vulnerable to these effects of climate action, the climate crisis. So away from that, now that we are having this discussion of the COP27, where a lot of negotiations is ongoing, and we hope that we're really just anticipating that there will be good deals that probably will benefit us as Africans. So in terms of negotiations and studying the nature of how things are in Africa, what do you feel should be given priority when they're negotiating for deals with the Western countries? What are some of the sectors where they should, African really, because this COP27 has been named as the African COP, so which areas should they really give priority in the negotiations?
I think the first area that should be given priority is especially the net zero emissions. So we want a just transition. We believe there are systems, and that's why we're saying a just transition. So we want a transition. That is what we can say. We want a transition. We want a fossil-free energy sector, because that is the beginning of this all. That is where this all began, and that is where it all continues to get worse. So if you can have an energy sector that is prioritizing renewable energy rather than really depending on fossil fuels, which are non-renewable and they're the highest in terms of emissions, then we can make a very big step forward towards cutting our global emissions. If Africa, especially, I'm taking this from the speech that our president said yesterday about us transiting to clean energy. So Africa, which is like the most vulnerable, is trying to do this. Then it calls out for the rest of the world. We've seen the Russia-Ukraine war and how the whole world was affected just because of overdependence on fossil fuels. So it's actually expensive. Because when you talk about renewable energy, the initial phases might be expensive, but eventually it becomes really, really cheap. So when we start to learn from hard lessons like this, then it's also very, very clear that we need that shift. So that is the first thing. The next thing is we need to acknowledge that the climate crisis is here with us, and we need to acknowledge that there are people who've been affected, there are people who've lost their lives, there are people who've lost their livelihoods. It's one thing when you're telling someone to adapt. If you're going to work and you're told to adapt, it's different. You can decide to walk to work, get a bicycle to work, get a cab or public transport to work. But it's another thing when you've lost your inheritance, when you've lost the land that you're supposed to inherit. It's another thing when you wanted to inherit the farming family business and crops are failing. It's different. That kind of loss and damage is it's hard to explain. It's even hard to say that it's hard to quantify in terms of money. So we also need to push for climate reparations, and it should not come in terms of donations. It's like for what you've lost, and it can't even be quantified. It can't be enough. So that's another thing that we need to push for. We need to push for climate finance. For where we can adapt, we need to adapt. For where we can mitigate, especially for the developed countries, they should definitely mitigate. Yeah, so those are the things that I feel we should push for.
All right, interesting. Now, it's good, of course, you're telling us about, actually this conversation in the COP27 is just revolving around fossil-free economy, where people should, get away from the fossil fuels and adopt, is it to adapt or to adopt the green and renewable energy? So, just on our personal capacity as Africans and Kenyans who are listening to this conversation and of course following on the COP27, how can we join hands, in pushing for climate action to ensure that just for posterity, the things that we are doing will benefit us in the near future, trying our best to cut it to zero emissions, to ensure that moving forward we are going to have a nation and a world at large that is safe for everyone from these issues and crises that we have just witnessed that are pertaining to the climate change.
This just goes back to our current president, His Excellency Honorable Mr. William Ruto. He is the chair of the Committee of African Heads of State and Governments on Climate Change. So through such a committee, we see that there is potential for us to work together, because we realize that in this climate crisis, you cannot work alone. Say, for example, we see a country like South Africa, which is still in Africa, the whole of Africa, it's actually the top emitter. So we can't say that the whole of Africa is doing something except that one country. So this comes in when we start to work together, when we start to realize that we have potential to actually transit to cleaner energy. According to his speech, the president said that we have the capacity to produce 20 megawatts of wind energy and gigawatts of wind energy and 10 of geothermal energy. That is 30 gigawatts. And not to mention solar energy. And being countries, we have a lot of countries that are within the equator. It means that we receive a lot of sunshine and we have a lot of potential for solar energy. So it means that if we all work together and realize that we have so much resources to transit to to energy that is clean and that would put us in a better place in terms of the future, then I feel like if we work together, I think that has to be the first thing. We need to work together. We need to work collaboratively to come up with solutions, to come up with agreements, to agree on things, on solutions that can move us forward. And I believe that if we come together as Africa, then we can be able to achieve that.
All right. Really interesting. Of course, great insight we're getting from you concerning the climate action. And this is a conversation that we want to roll it and continue with it, not just to the end of this COP27, but later on we shall be having more and more of such discussion. Of course, we still need your input on this. I'm not giving you a chance to make your final remarks because you've just summed it up in a superb way. So, yeah, that's it for the interview on climate action. Moving forward, Amazon Web Services AWS, a subsidiary of Amazon that provides on-demand cloud computing platforms to individuals in collaboration with the Ministry of Education today, announced additional investments in Kenya's education sector, which will see more unemployed and underemployed youths trained for high-quality jobs in the technology sector, as our reporter Eugene Mayabi now informs us.
To help individuals lead prosperous lives in the digital age, local, national and regional leaders are reimaging education systems, skills training, and private-public partnerships. Amazon Web Services works with governments and public institutions around the world to upskill, reskill, and prepare individuals for the cloud jobs of today and tomorrow. AWS and the Ministry of ICT have joined forces to provide free foundational cloud content through a Jira digital platform accessible to all citizens, as well as in over 300 training centers across the country from early 2023. The Restart program, which covers sub-Saharan Africa, is committed to training up to 29 million people, both underemployed and unemployed youth, on cloud computing skills until 2025. Earlier this year, AWS launched an AWS Restart pilot in Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps in partnership with the Danish Refugee Council, engaging unemployed refugee youth who otherwise might not have had access to this career path from within the camps. In Kenya, the AWS Cloud Career Training Program, AWS Restart, has welcomed more than 500 unemployed youth in Kenya in less than 2 years, preparing them for a life-changing career in cloud computing. Today, the AWS has awarded finalists who have completed the AWS Restart program. With the rising number of unemployment in the country, the AWS team calls for students and also the unemployed to join the program in order to get skills in cloud computing. For KUTV, I am Susan Wayaki.
Let's take a look at what's happening in the world of sports. Now, secondary schools have called on the incorporation of Taekwondo in inter-school sports competition, with Irigitathi Secondary School in the Ragwa Sub-County, Nyandarua County, embracing Taekwondo training. Now, the initiative, they say, it is a way of equipping students with self-defense skills against the various risks that they might encounter in their daily activities.
Nyandarua County schools have assimilated Taekwondo training among their students to enable them gain self-defense skills to apply in their day-to-day jeopardies. The school trainer at Irigitathi Secondary School, Stephen Wangombe, alas Master Steve, said that Taekwondo would be great if the sport was incorporated alongside other sports. He also appeals to the youths with interest in Taekwondo in the country to put effort in a bid to nurture their talents.
Sasa ombi langu ni kwa serikali introduce kitu kwa mashule na pia iandike walimu wengine makoch, instructor wa kutrain hii mchezo wa taekwondo, kwa sababu kwa shule naona kuna wanafunzi wengi talented.
Mr. Kimura, the school's games teacher, urged the government through the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Sports to incorporate taekwondo alongside other inter-school sports like football and athletics.
Ningependekeza ya kwamba iwapo Wizara ya Elimu ingechukua mchezo huu na kuweka katika ratiba ya michezo ambayo inachezwa katika shule za upili, litakuwa ni jambo nzuri sana, kwa sababu tutapata wanafunzi wetu wakiweza kujikuza na vipawa vyao hapa shule za upili, na hata wakitoka kule nje mchezo huu utakuwa umenawiri zaidi hata katika ngazi za kitaifa na kimataifa.
Eunice Wengeshi, a Form 4 student at Rigidhatha Secondary School and who is also the female captain of the Taekwondo club, says that the sport has enabled a lot of girls to data harassment.
Unaweza kupigana na mtu yote lakini si kuumiza, kujikinga kutokana na kuumizwa ama kubakwa.
Embracing the Korean form of martial arts brings hope to many youths, especially the girl child who aspires to acquire self-defense mechanism to combat sexual harassment. John Wahome, KUTV.
And with 12 days left before the kickoff of the FIFA World Cup, we'll take a closer look at some of the venues for the fascinating event. And in tonight's edition of World Cup's Diaries, we focus on the Al Abati Stadium, the venue for the opening match between Qatar and Ecuador.
Al Bayt Stadium is one of the iconic football venues in Qatar, and only second to Lusail Stadium in terms of capacity. The 60,000-seater stadium is located on the southern eastern edge of Al City, which is approximately 35 kilometers to the north of the capital of Doha. The construction of the stadium had culture in paramount consideration, with the tent-like roof resembling the traditional Bedouin tents, popular with the nomadic Arabs in the Gulf region. As part of coping with extreme weather conditions, the stadium has a retractable roof, which opens and closes in 20 minutes. The construction of the stadium began in late 2015, running at an estimated cost of $847 million. It was later opened on 30th November last year, with the first round group match of the Arab Cup between Qatar and Bahrain. The intriguing structure went on to host the final of the same tournament, which was won by Algeria. As part of ensuring sustainability, the upper tier of the stadium will be repurposed to create sporting facilities in Qatar, while some of the reconstruction materials will be donated to developing countries. The stadium has been awarded a 5-star rating for its design and construction from the Global Sustainability Assessment System. Lincoln Chege, World Cup Diaries for KUTV.
Manchester City defender Benjamin Mendy has begun testifying in his trial for the multiple alleged rape cases where he has pleaded not guilty to all the charges against him in the case, which began in August this year. The Premier League star is accused of a string of sexual offences, including rape, attempted rape, and sexual assault. Mendy joined the Premier League champion City from French side Monaco in 2017 and was suspended after being charged in August last year. The Frenchman is on the verge of missing the World Cup in Qatar, with the defending champions France if found guilty of all the allegations made against him. Right, and with that, we can interrupt here in KTV Primetime News. Many thanks indeed for your valid company throughout the bulletin. Our sign language interpreter tonight has been Macrin Achieng. My name is Omondi Otieno, and tomorrow you shall be with Ann Odida during the Primetime Bulletin. So you stay with us. Until next time, you have a great night.